Thank you. Thank you for a highly inspiring afternoon. And by the way, it was not just Brits and French who drove back and forth between the two worlds in Berlin and that day one. I was also there. It was a very interesting time. Talking about the first and the second word, you haven't said anything about Russia. That makes Norwegian highly anxious because we are in a highly rough neighborhood. I would like to hear a little bit on your opinion. Where does Russia fit into the quotation with a rising China declining west? Will it turn east, west, or will it operate alone? And what kind of conditions do we have to survive alone? Thank you.
Well, this is a great note on which to conclude, because Russia illustrates, I think, very strikingly just how important institutions are. The disastrous failure of the political transition in the 1990s to produce the rule of law explains an awful lot of what is wrong with Russia today. And it's the real reason, I think, why Russia cannot fully take advantage of its vast natural resources. I remember doing a calculation to work out how much the known reserves of all natural resources were worth in market prices if you could sell the planet. I think it's always worth having a price in mind just in case an alien takeover bid is mounted. So the Russians come in ahead, or at least they did when I did the numbers, back at the height of the commodity spike. And yet, because the Kremlin is more than crony capitalism, it's state monopoly capitalism, Russia has not been able to take full advantage of these opportunities, and indeed has made a completely disastrous mess of its natural gas policy. I mean, Gazprom has gone from hero to zero as a company, mainly because its decisions were not made on business grounds. They were made on spurious and badly thought through strategic grounds. I was in Russia in January. I hadn't been there for a while, mainly because the last time I'd been there I had vowed never to go back. So I was talked into returning, and I saw some interesting signs of improvement. So although it's not in the newspapers, where the focus is always on Mr. Putin and his interesting private life and business interests, below the level of the Kremlin's autocracy, there is improvement. So in middle-ranking Russian towns, a middle class is going about its business, and something has definitely changed for the better. Institutionally, although it's not the rule of law, the financial system has got a lot more mature, and there are companies in Russia that don't look like Gazprom, like Sberbank, for example. And because Sberbank wants to be an international player, it can't be a completely corrupt entity. So I wasn't as depressed as I thought I would be by my trip to Russia. What's clear is that with poor institutions, very weak rule of law, an overpowerful executive, demographic weakness, though that has improved somewhat, mainly through migration, and political, let's say political unrealism, in the sense that there is still this nostalgia for the Soviet empire, at least as a geopolitical entity. Russia has actually pretty limited options. They exaggerated the power that natural gas gave them. That power to exert leverage over Europe is going to go. It's a few pipelines away from going. And secondly, they are far more vulnerable than they want us to think to China. And I think both Xi in Beijing and Putin in Moscow realize that there is much to be said for a stronger Russo-Chinese relationship, particularly in a world where the United States is weak. So I think what we're seeing, and it's been going on for some time, Shanghai Cooperation, but now the most recent meeting between Xi and Putin, I think we are seeing a fundamental realignment. And Russo-Chinese friendship is going to be a force to reckon with. It's obvious how interdependent they could be. China's demand, Russia's supply. It figures. And of course, they can have great fun at the expense of a weak United States. Earlier in this discussion, here I'll wrap it up, I alluded to the 1970s. I think in historical perspective, 1989 wasn't such a great turning point. It seemed like it at the time, but I think actually the bigger turning points came in the 70s. The Iranian Revolution, Chinese reform, the fatal Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The 1970s were a turning point in the West too, Thatcher, Reagan. These were the big inflection points. And now we're seeing a kind of unwinding of that era. It's unwinding in the Middle East. That Kissinger era is pretty much over there. And I think it's unwinding in the sense that the Chinese-American relationship, which was so important from 72 onwards, is gradually turning sour. And the Snowden affair illustrates just the way the Cold War will play out. I don't want to claim ownership of the term Cold War. As I said, Noah Feldman at Harvard Law School coined the phrase, has a book of that title. I think we're now probably in the early stages of the Cold War. And in that Cold War, the Russians will happily take the Chinese side whenever the opportunity presents itself. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention.